big question we're asking today is, can COVID-19 save artisan cheesemakers? The rush for toilet paper and flour got a lot of media attention, but the pandemic has also put some other things in the spotlight, including where our food comes from. More and more people are looking to buy local, and as well as having farmers markets back in action in most places now, online sales are booming, providing another outlet for cheesemakers and other specialist food producers. Our guest today, Cressida Cains, founded Pecora Dairy in 2011. It's a sheep milk dairy producing yogurt and cheese products. Cressida is also the winner of the AgriFutures Australia New South Wales Rural Woman of the Year Award. Cressida thinks that the interest in provenance is here to stay and believes the dairy industry generally has a great future. Cressida, over to you for your thoughts on the future of the dairy industry and artisan cheese.
Hi, Karen. Thanks very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you all. My name's Cressida Cains. I'm a sheep dairy farmer in Robertson in the Southern Highlands, so a couple of hours southwest of Sydney, in a very high rainfall area. My husband Michael and I milk about 150 dairy sheep. We milk East Frisian dairy ewes and turn all of that milk into cheese and yogurt on the farm. So we have a small factory attached to our dairy, which is where we create all of our cheese and yogurt. We produce about 7 tonnes annually, and we make a small range of cheeses, including raw milk cheeses. So Pecora Dairy was actually licensed 2 years ago, and the first cheesery licensed in Australia to make raw milk cheeses. So that was something that we've been working on for many years, and we're delighted to get that over the line. The kind of raw milk cheeses that we make are a completely new category of cheese in Australia. It's where there is no heat treatment at all. So literally the milk goes from the udder into the vat, and then we add cultures and make that into cheese. And the really important thing about that, and why it's so wonderful that Australia is now able to make this kind of raw milk cheese with no heat treatment at all, is that it is a true representation of provenance. It's a true representation of time and place. So it's literally taking the milk that the ewes produced that morning, and the grass that they were eating, and the weather as it was on the farm, and the ecosystem, literally in that morning's milking, and encapsulating that into cheese and preserving that. So it is the most wonderful and most true taste of the landscape of our farm. So we're sincerely excited about being able to produce that raw milk cheese. Over my years in the dairy industry, I've been very aware of difficulties that we do have in dairy in this country. It's a big conversation, it's a nuanced conversation, and there's certainly no single answer. But in my area, in the Southern Highlands, it's actually a very old dairy farming area. For sure, in Kangaloon and Robertson, which are obviously we're in Robertson, and then Kangaloon surrounds us, there were numerous dairy farms, and now they've all closed down, bar 1 or 2, and you see dairy sheds littering the landscape of this incredibly beautiful part of the world with this huge high rainfall that we've got. Very suitable sort of dairy country. So over the years, I've been thinking about this a lot, and thinking about whether there was a contribution I could make, and thinking about how there possibly could be another way for small dairy farmers to not close their farm gates. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the state of the industry as I see it at present, from some research that I did in regards to dairy farming currently in this country. So in this country, in the 1980s, there were 22,000 dairy farms in this country. And today we have just a little over 5,000. So it's a massive drop. that we're looking at. And it's not the big dairy farms we're talking about, it's the little dairy farms. So the dairy farms with 200 cows and under, they're the ones who are really falling off a cliff and who are really in trouble. And in fact, in 2019, there were 486 dairy farms that closed their farm gates. So that's the largest annual exodus we've had in this country. So it's very, very concerning. And really, obviously, with the big dairy farms, they have the capacity to be able to use economies of scale and negotiate with those processes. But for the little guys, there's really very little room to move. There's very little bargaining power for them. So it becomes very, very difficult for them to be profitable. So I came up with an idea of creating a website whereby they could help small dairy farms potentially transform up the value chain. So another way that they could take back control of their businesses, and that being starting to produce their own branded products. So I'm talking things like milk, yogurt, gelato, or cheese. Because an interesting fact is, on the other hand, although we have a number of small dairy farms closing down in this country, we also have a huge number, we also import a huge amount of cheese into this country. And that's actually increasing by about 4,000 tonnes every year. So a lot of specialty cheese and yogurt is imported into this country. So really, the bottom line is that Australians have a rising appetite for cheese and better quality cheese, but at the moment, this unmet need this unmet demand is being taken up by imported product from Europe and elsewhere. So with Dairy Cocoon, it is a website whereby dairy farmers can obtain business skills and business support and marketing plans, also find the education that they need to start thinking about producing the branded product, and also a support hub, because for some dairy farmers who have been doing the same thing for generations, it's a big leap and it's a difficult thing to do. So I suppose Dairy Cocoon is a curated source of information whereby dairy farmers can access what they need to potentially start thinking about another way of producing product. So this was my contribution to the dairy industry, and interestingly, with COVID, as we're looking at a very difficult and different time, people are really starting to think about the provenance of their food, exactly where their foods come from and how it's produced. And there's been a very strong shift toward local product. So I think this can continue, and I think it's a really exciting time. And I think that, you know, my project with Dairy Cocoon is particularly timely, and I really think that there's a very strong future for the small Australian dairy farms. Thanks, Karen. Did you have some questions?
Yes, I definitely do. Absolutely. So I guess just to go back to the beginning, at least of this part of your life, because you've only been doing this since 2011, what on earth prompted you to get into not just dairying with all this doom and gloom going on, but a sheep dairy?
My husband and I both had corporate careers in Sydney and were really looking for a bit of a tree change, I suppose. We were both in the wine industry, so that confluence between the art and science of wine is really quite symbiotic with cheese making. Obviously, the cheese making area is highly scientific. So that was one of the things that really attracted us. Sheep dairying, well, there's probably there's a half a dozen of us or so in the country that milk sheep and make cheese. And we saw sheep milking as a niche market and as a profitable way of turning milk into cheese and having a reasonably small property and being able to make a good living from that. So sheep milk is highly prized in Europe. It's very dense nutrition. delicious milk. And really some of the best cheeses in the world are made from sheep milk. And so I think this was one of the things that really attracted us to milking sheep. Not only do we love the animals, I think as any farmer would know, you have to be invested and love the animals to do it day in and day out. But also the amazing milk they produce is, it's really like the Rolls-Royce milk for cheese making.
So how much demand is there then? You mentioned that there's like 4,000 tonnes of specialty cheese that's being imported into Australia. How much of that is sheep cheese or goat's cheese, some of those not just fancy cheeses but also made from not cow's milk? Is that growing? Are people in Australia interested in that stuff?
Look, I think I think that definitely people are interested in nutrition. There's a lot of talk about gut health and microbiome and fermented foods at the moment. Obviously, cheese is one of the original fermented foods, so we're not actually reinventing the wheel here. Well, there's interesting, small businesses, wonderful small businesses with kombucha and sauerkraut and all these fabulous fermented foods. It's interesting to also remember that cheese is actually one of, as I said, one of the most ancient of fermented foods. I think with the interest in various aspects of health, and also, as we've seen, intolerances in children for various aspects of cow dairy, certainly people are interested in alternative milk sources. So most definitely the access to goat milk and sheep milk cheese is definitely an issue for Australians.
Terrific. So how hard was your property and your company and your business hit by not just COVID-19, but before that, bushfires and drought and all of those things that have been affecting rural New South Wales and Australia?
Look, it has been a very challenging year, I think, for all of us, and we haven't escaped any of that. Whilst we would be really cracking jokes compared to most areas of Australia in terms of the drought, we have such an amazing high rainfall in this area, but for our area, for the Southern Highlands, it was desperately dry. And we, like all other livestock owners, spent a huge amount of money on hand feeding pretty much all of last year. And it was certainly a very challenging time. And then with the bushfires, and while we were not directly affected, they were just below us. So we got to the point where we actually moved our ewe lambs off the property. So it's obviously pretty difficult to move the dairy flock and that need to be milked twice a day. But we got to the stage where the fires were very close and very threatening to our farms. So we made the decision that should we lose everything, then we would be able to start with that nucleus of dairy ewes, because it's just not that easy to buy dairy sheep in Australia. So it was a very confronting time, and it was a very tense time. It was hugely difficult, and we had to make some decisions which we didn't really think that we would ever get to, I suppose, when we first started to create a business in milking sheep and making cheese. And then moving along into COVID, our business is structured where we had a huge amount. In fact, we had about 40% of our cheese goes to restaurants both in Sydney and in Melbourne. So we lost that business overnight. And also one of our largest, we're doing the largest farmers market in Sydney, which is called Carriageworks Farmers Market, and that closed very rapidly too. So like many people, we had to sort of pivot our business, which we did, and we put all of our cheeses online. And fortuitously, we actually had opened a small shop in the main street of Robertson, and we were very grateful because we enjoy a huge amount of local support, and we were able to catch up a lot of our business through there. So over COVID, with the way we pivoted our business, we're fine, and we've done, we're continuing to do what we do, and obviously the sheep keep milking every day, and they don't know that there's a pandemic going on. But certainly it's changed the way we do business in some things, and some things we will continue to do things that way. And then also, as you touched on previously, there's an interesting push toward online, and there have been a number of big players who have entered the market for artisan cheesemakers, literally distributing that cheese throughout networks. And I think that, people have really embraced the online parcel through the post system. And I think that I'd like to think that that is something that is really here to stay. And it's not just cheesemakers, obviously across all elements of small business, people have gone online and found that very successful.
Now, cheese through the post is not something that I would usually think of, given that it comes out of a supermarket fridge in the car straight home and back into the fridge. How does that all even work?
Yeah, it's actually something we considered for a long time, and with COVID, it sort of pushed us to do the final aspects of our research. But really, it's about the appropriate number of ice packs and packing that really carefully. And we use a beautiful wool insulation from a lovely company which produces sustainable packaging, which is everything to us. So we certainly wouldn't be sending things around in polystyrene boxes, but with the availability of these sorts of products, it's made it very feasible and realistic for us to send it through the post. And we've had an enormous reaction, which is really, really exciting.
So if you're getting the wool from another farm, what about the byproducts from your own sheep? Do you shear them? Is that sort of part of your business model as well?
We do shear our sheep. They're East Friesians, as I mentioned, and they do need to be shorn every year. And whilst they're obviously an animal bred for milking, so their fleece is not a high-grade fleece, it's not a fine wool fleece. But of course, wool is such a wonderful natural product, and absolutely it has a market. So it's more, I suppose you could say, more carpet grade wool, but absolutely it's definitely a value part of our business. Yeah.
And you mentioned that there's a lot more than just cheesemakers going online. Do you think that this shift, there's a lot of discussion of post-COVID, or when we get to whatever new normal COVID is, are people going to continue going online, or are things just going to revert back more to normal? What's your view on how big the online part of your business is going to remain?
I think it will always remain a significant part of our business, and we'd like to continue to grow it. I think it's important for Australians to sustain this understanding and interest in the provenance of their food. It's easy to go back to your buying habits, just buying from the big supermarkets, not checking the back of packets and seeing where things are produced. But really, when we talk about the amount of cheese that's imported into this country, and on the other hand, helping small dairy farmers transform into producing their branded product, it's a situation where we need the Australian consumers to become more educated and to support those small producers, because we're going to need that for them to be able to be successful and have thriving businesses. So it's really up to the consumer to continue and remember to not just fall back into their previous rut, I suppose, of buying something that they're not sure where it's made, and really to just make those very targeted buying decisions. And it's just so incredible how it's actually accumulative. If everybody just checks and makes those very targeted buying decisions, it's a huge help for all sorts of small producers.
Is that a bit of a chicken and egg situation of having the demand to then grow the scale, in order to get into maybe supermarkets and more than farmers markets and places like that for a lot of artisan producers?
Look, supermarkets are not really, they're not really my game, and they're not really for a lot of small producers. And I think with the rise of farmers markets, there are so many farmers markets, and there are so many ways of accessing small producers, even for people in the cities. So I do think that, while supermarkets of course have a place, I think it's right that people should make that effort to, seek out their local farmers market on a Saturday, even in the big cities, and see what they can get direct from the farmer or from the farmers market, and really know exactly where that's coming from.
And do you see that trend continuing to grow? Obviously, farmers markets are seen by some people as the elite, or people who can afford to pay that little bit more for specialty artisan products rather than going to the supermarket and just paying for the cheapest. Do you think that move will also continue to grow?
Yeah, I do. I do think it'll grow, and I think it's, I think it's particularly important because I don't think it's, when we're looking at sustainability, on a long-term track for Australia, and how Australian agriculture is going to play out in the longer term, there's going to be huge numbers of small producers who don't have enough produce to go to the supermarket, and who don't have enough bargaining power to be able to get a proper price for what their product is worth. And I think it's also a bit of a consumer shift and an understanding of what it takes to produce something and how much it costs to produce something. I think that with some areas we've been a little bit skewed by our understanding of how much it costs to produce a product because of how much imported food that we have in this country. So I would argue that it's probably better for people to buy less and to buy better quality, and understanding where it's come from. Because if you look at the amount of food waste we have in this country and how much we throw out, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to, buy a smaller amount and really value that product, and make sure that the farmer is being paid a fair price for whatever they've produced.
Do you think that's part of the benefit of COVID, that people have actually seen empty food shelves in supermarkets and places like that, and really had to think about that sort of thing and food waste?
Yeah, I do think so, Karen. I think it's been particularly poignant for people to step back. I think, if 18 months ago someone had said to us all, we're going to stop planes flying in the sky and there won't be things on supermarket shelves, I mean, we just wouldn't have even been able to wrap our heads around that. It would not have even ever seemed feasible. So I think it's an interesting and perhaps a really poignant time in our history where we where we can choose the way we move forward.
And it's not for everyone, though. I would have thought that the artisans, so the dairy cocoon project that you've got going, and just your general positivity about farmers markets and branded products and things, what proportion of dairy farmers do you think would be interested in that sort of opportunity and be able to make a go of it?
Well, I've had a really quite overwhelming response from dairy farmers, and also from the public seeking more information about what I'm doing. Certainly, it seems that an increasing number of people are wanting to access the the story behind their food, and understand more about how things are produced and where they're coming from. But you're absolutely right. I mean, as I said at the start, dairy farming in Australia is complex. It's very nuanced, and what I'm suggesting is certainly not a silver bullet for the whole of the industry. And it's not even for every small dairy farmer. It's for those who are willing to, to consider it as an alternative path to producing product. And it will be appropriate for some, but I'm certainly not saying it's the be all and end all, and will work for every small dairy farmer. But it's simply another way where small dairy farmers can consider producing branded product rather than literally getting out of the industry altogether. Because obviously, once we've lost all of these small dairy farms, that's it. They're not coming back.
So do you think that there's ever going to be a time when the $1 a litre milk disappears and people will be paying more for milk than they are for water, and the supermarkets and the processors at that large scale will be valuing the products more than they seem to at the moment?
That's not really my area, negotiating with the supermarkets and the big producers and the large processors. But I do know from talking to people, the public, and the reaction to what I'm doing, certainly there is a great interest and groundswell towards accessing branded product. And I see certainly, you know, if you look at, you know, when I go to my local supermarket, the branded produce, the branded milk, which comes specifically from our area, is almost always sold out. So I think there is, you know, as I said, certainly it's not a silver bullet approach. It's just not going to solve all of the issues for the industry. But I do think that there is certainly an interest and a strong support for branded product in this country.
Do you think that what Dairy Cocoon is doing is transferable to other products, other branded products, and is either directly of help to other, not just dairy, but other food producers, or has that potential? Like, is that the ultimate dream as well?
Dairy is my passion, and it's the area that I live and breathe, I suppose. So what I want to do is specifically targeted towards that area and towards the small producers. So I don't foresee Dairy Cocoon at this stage moving into any other industry. But you know, if I could take, for instance, a small dairy farm just down the road from us, they're a 5th generation dairy farm who were about to go to the wall because they had sold off as much land as they could, and the young son came back into the area and wanted to produce their own product to save the family dairy farm, and he's just got so much strong local support, and they've now produced a thriving business. And for his girls, for his young children, you know, that farm is now secure for generations to come. And obviously one of the other interesting aspects of that, by taking back control of their business and producing their own branded product, it also means that dairy farmers can potentially reduce their herd numbers. So that means reducing stress on the land and also reducing the inputs and potentially the stress on the dairy farm. So this particular dairy farm was milking about 150 animals, and they're literally now milking 30 cows, and they've got a thriving business. They're making way more money and have a strong, viable future ahead of them. So, you know, I think my work's cut out in the dairy industry, and I'm happy to stick to that, and I hope that that's where my contribution can be valued.
And so the Rural Woman of the Year award that you won with AgriFutures Australia, how has that helped with publicity, with the bursary that you get? Do you think that that's been a help in getting the word out there to all the dairy farmers?
Most definitely. It's the AgriFutures Rural Women's Award is an amazing program to have participated in, and it's particularly wonderful to be now amongst the alumni for that project, for that program. There's some incredible women throughout rural Australia who have these wonderful ideas, and I think that particular award is a great way for women who very often have ideas, really fabulous ideas, you know, that percolate in their heads. And so to be able to have that framework which supports them and assists them to get that idea, to distill that idea and potentially get that out into the media and get support for it, is a very, very valuable award. And it's been such an honour to go through the program.
So where is Dairy Cocoon up to? Is it all sort of in place, or is this an ongoing thing to build the resources?
So the website is still under construction. The organisation, as a non-for-profit organisation, is set up, and the support hub is up and going. And I have you know, as I said, lots of dairy farmers who are contacting me and emails coming in, which is really wonderful. So I am, you know, fielding those responses as best I can, and communicating in that support hub at the moment. So it's a private Facebook group and also the Instagram. And then as as time proceeds, I do envisage that further toward the end of the year, by December, the website will be up and going. We'll be running a pilot program, and then we'll be absolutely kicking off and ready to go for our small dairy farmers who want to participate in the program.
So do you see a time when you focus completely on dairy cocoon and leave the sheep milking to hubby?
No, no. My passion is look. My passion is all of it. You know, I'd like to think that I can do both. But Pecora Dairy and the cheese that we produce and the plans that we have, and what we want to do in the future is substantial. But I think that dairy cocoon can work alongside it, and I think that it's a rather lovely synergy between both of those elements that can work well together.
Terrific. Look, that's fantastic, Cressida. Thanks so much for your time today. That's all we've got time for. I really appreciate it, because I know that you are very busy with all of this stuff going on, for making time to talk to the farm riders today.